Hi everyone, today I'll be doing a tutorial on the local adjustment tools for Photolab 6 Elite. And basically it's just a way for you to make adjustments to your image either by particular areas or by luminance, the brightness of different areas of the image, or even by just certain colors in the image. Now before we get started, if you don't have Photolab 6 Elite yet or you're thinking about purchasing it, I do have my affiliate links down below so you can download a free 30-day trial, which is a full working copy, and you'll be able to follow along with my tutorials. And if you find these videos helpful, maybe consider buying me a coffee or making a small donation in the links below because they help me to continue making videos like this for you. So with that said, let's get started. So let's distinguish between what a global adjustment is and what a local adjustment is. Global adjustments basically make changes to the entire images all at once. So these first three panels all make global adjustments. So for example, if I wanted to darken this image, I could just use the exposure compensation slider and I can darken the entire image, or conversely, I can brighten the entire image. I can make selective changes to all the dark areas or the blacks of the image, or I can raise the shadows in the image, but again, these are still all global adjustments. Now, local adjustments are to make smaller changes in just certain areas. So for example, if I just wanted to brighten the eyes, I would go to the local adjustments panel here, click on the tool icon, and then I'm presented with a brush or whatever the last tool I used. And if I right click on the image, I'll be brought up with the Radial menu, which shows me all the different tools that I can use. And I'll go over each one of these as I'm editing some images, but let's just start with a simple brush tool. Now up here you'll see an overlay of the brush toolbar which controls the brush's behavior, and you can hide this or you can bring it back up. And the first slider here is just for the size of the brush, which is pretty obvious. Feathering controls how soft the brush is around the edges, and then we have flow and opacity. Now flow is basically how much of the effect is going to be applied when you're using the brush, and opacity is the transparency of that effect, or how much you will actually see of it. Now the main difference is that flow is additive and opacity is more like a limiter of the effect. All right, let me show you how this works in practice. So I'm just going to increase these both to 100%, and we're going to draw a dot here. And then I'm going to pull the exposure down on that one little spot to the maximum -4, and then I'm going to hide this control panel, or they like to call it the equalizer, by hitting the letter E key on my keyboard. All right, let's draw one more dot here, and then reduce the flow to 50%, and then draw a dot here. And then let's reduce the flow to 10% and draw a dot here. And this one may be a little hard to see. But basically we have a -4 here. Now this is a -2 at 50%, and this is less than 1 at 10%. Now remember I said that flow is additive. So if I continue to click on this one spot that was 100%, it's not going to make any difference because we're already at 100% flow on this particular dot. However, this dot here was at 50%. So if I click this back to 50% and I click it one more time, we now have a dot that's just as dark as this one because we added 50% twice. And then if I go back to 10% for this last dot and I click on that dot again, it's now at 20%. Click it again at 30%. And if I click it 7 more times to get to 100%, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We now should have 3 dots basically here at 100%. All right, now let's do the same thing with opacity. So let's put our flow back up to 100%, and we will draw a dot here and do -4, hide the control panel, and then let's draw one more dot here at 100%. Let's put this at 50% roughly, and then we'll do one at 10%. So initially these look exactly the same as what happened with the flow. And actually if I go back to this dot and put this at 50% and click on it again, you can see we have a dot virtually as dark as the one next to it. And if I bring it back down to 10% and click on this dot 10 times, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I'm almost as dark as all the other dots again. And so you might be wondering, what is the difference? Well, the difference is actually when you actually start to brush. Okay, so let me show you. So let's bring these all back up to 100%. And let's draw a new line here, actually brush something. And then draw in a -4. So we have a nice thick dark line here. Let's put the flow at 50% and draw another line here. And I'm going to hide the equalizer. And you can see that this is no longer 50%. This is nearly as dark as the original one that we drew. And that's because the brush, as you're dragging down on your mouse, is overlapping itself causing this line to be virtually 100%. So even if I go down to 10% and I draw a line, you can see that that's lighter, but it's not really a 10% light, as opposed to like if I just draw a single dot, you can see that this is much lighter than this line was. Now if we do the same thing with opacity, let's bring that back up to 100. Let's draw a line here and pull in, we're still at -4. Now let me put this to 50% or thereabouts and draw a line here. You can see that this is much lighter than this. And then if I go all the way down to 10% and draw a line down, you can see that this is much lighter than this one. So we've capped basically the brush's effect at these percentage levels of the opacity. Now you can still continue to draw over the top, and it'll make it darker so that we can get all the way back to 100%. But I just wanted you to understand the difference. When you're just drawing dots, there's really no difference what settings you have here, relatively speaking, but it's when you actually start to draw and paint using your brush that it starts to make a difference. And this is going to be important when you're editing, because sometimes you want to make very small changes a little at a time, and that's when you're going to reduce the opacity and or the flow to make that change. Now typically I like to work with just the opacity and leave the flow at 100%, but there are times when I want even a more subtle change in the image, so I'll reduce the opacity down and the flow down at the same time. Alright, now I've reset the image and I want to talk about the controls for the brush itself, or this equalizer panel. As I said earlier, if this kind of gets in the way when you're trying to draw something, you can hit the letter E key to make it disappear, and then hit the letter E key again to turn it back on. So the E key is your toggle for this equalizer. And then we have three groups of controls here. We have our exposure controls, and these are very similar to the controls that we have over here. And then we have our color controls, again, very similar to what's in the control panel. And as you're hovering over each control, you can see what they're called. So we have vibrancy, saturation, temperature, etc. And then down here we have our sharpness and blur tools. So if I want to sharpen her eyes a little bit, I could just slide the sharpening slider up, or if I want to make them blurry, I can blur her eyes out like that. Now I want to show you a couple of quick things, and that is I can take this brush and move it around the image like so. So now I'm blurring her nose instead of her eyes. And also we have a show cropped areas tick box here. So I have to crop in the image first. So let me just do that real quick. And we'll do a quick crop. And now you can see if I click on the shortcut to local adjustments that the tool is a little bit out of frame here. And that's not really a big deal. You can still make adjustments and things. However, if I click on the show cropped areas, now we can see the entire image with just the cropped area here in highlight. Now this is useful when you have several tools all around the image. So maybe I had a different brush out here that I was drawing on. So showing the cropped areas helps me to see where all the tools are in the image and what effect they might be having on each other if they happen to be overlapping. And if I don't like this tool here, I can just highlight it like so, and then just hit the delete key and it's gone. Now another way to delete a tool is to just go into the local adjustments panel and select the particular brush or tool from this layers panel, and then I can just hit the trash button here to delete this mask, or I can just hide it like so. So this disables the effect that that particular brush is having if I want to see exactly what it's doing, or I can click it and turn it back on. Now there are a bunch of other ways to kind of do the same thing, but let's uncheck the cropped areas, and let's start a new tool here. Let's say we want to just brighten this area up here, and then let's start another tool, and we'll just darken this area down here, for example. So again, I can turn these effects on and off individually, or I can click the compare tool up here to do them all at once. So this is with all the local adjustment changes, this is without, but you have to be careful because there's a drop-down menu here, and right now we have all corrections except local adjustments checked. But we could compare it to the original image here without any cropping. And now when I click compare, it's showing the original image before any edits at all, global and local. And then we also have a slider here, where we can just kind of slide back and forth and see where all the adjustments are. All right, so I've reset the image, and now I want to talk about all of the individual tools here in the radial menu. And it's probably going to be easier to show you how each of these work as I'm editing an image rather than talking about them individually. So let's go ahead and get started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit this image very quickly to look more like this image. Now, of course, editing can be very subjective, and I like very punchy images with rich colors and high contrast, nice tight crops, but basically I want to show you how to use these tools so that you can edit the images the way you like them. So I'm going to start out with just a simple crop, and we'll do a 1:1 crop, standard portrait, and I like the eyes to be roughly about 1/3 of the way into the frame when I do my pet portraits. Now this image, it's a cute image of my dog, but it's relatively flat, right? Because there's not a lot of contrast or differences in lighting. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go ahead and click on the local adjustments tool and right click here, and I'm going to start using with a gradient filter. And the gradient basically just global changes, and you can see its effect with the masking in blue here. And I'm going to brighten up the image here on the right side, about like that. And then I'm going to add a little bit of warmth, so it looks like maybe there's some sun coming in on that side. And then I'm going to do the opposite on the other side. I'm going to make this side darker, about that much. And then also cool it off just a little bit as well. Not too much, just a hint. Now I'm going to brighten the eye, so I'm going to deactivate this tool. Right click, and I'm going to select the control point this time. And I'm going to zoom in and get right in on this brownish red area on her eyes here. And close the circle a little bit. And then let's just brighten them up a little bit, just using the exposure comp. And I'm going to add some clear view. I like the eyes to look really glossy. And then I'm going to apply the same thing over here. And that looks pretty good. Maybe just a little more brightness there. Now you may have noticed that the control points are having an effect a little bit outside of her eyes as well. Now it's not so bad in this case, but if I exaggerate this like that, you can see it's definitely going into her fur, which you may not want. So I can minimize this effect when I'm using control points or control lines. So I need to go into the control panel here for local adjustments. And you can see we have mask selectivity when we use a control point or a control line, in this case a control point. So chroma is basically color, luma is basically by light. Now the lighting between her eyes and her fur is similar enough that I probably don't want to make any adjustments here, but there is a distinct difference in her eye color versus her fur color. So in this case, using the chroma mask makes more sense. So what I'm going to do is hit the M key on my keyboard so I can see the mask for the control point. And you can see that its effect in the white areas is kind of being spread out all over. So if I increase the chroma slider here for the mask, you can see it's narrowing down just to her eyes. And a little bit of bleed out over here is okay. I think it looks very natural. So let's go with that, and I'll go ahead and hit the M key on my keyboard. And now we're back to the image. So let's go ahead and reduce the brightness back down to something more normal. Something right about there. Looks good. Now there is another way to reduce the effect of a control points area. So let me go ahead and reset the selectivity and increase the brightness again so it'll be more obvious. But if while I'm inside this circle, I hold the Alt key, you'll see a little negative next to the control point here, cursor. And if I click on it, it's going to reduce the effect anywhere inside this circle. So I can expand this a little bit, then just click around the eye like this. And you can see that it's reducing the effect. And I can do the same thing on this side. And I don't like to use the control points this way so much. There is a time and a place to use negative control points, and I may do that on another image I edit. But generally speaking, I prefer to use the chroma and luminosity masking. So I'm going to delete these negative control points by just selecting one and hitting the delete key. And I'll get rid of all of these. All right, let me go ahead and reduce the brightness back down to a normal level, and then increase the chroma back to roughly about there. Now you may have also noticed there's no control bar up here for the control points, so I don't have like any feathering or opacity or flow, but I do have an opacity slider in the local adjustments panel. And this applies to any particular adjustment that we created here or layer. So if I want to reduce the effect of the control points directly without changing my chroma or anything else, I can just slide this back and reduce the effect that the control point is having. And this applies to any of the filters. Now let me zoom out, and I want to show you a couple other things too. So if I click on this one, obviously the opacity can reduce its effect, but I'm pretty happy with the way that looks. However, on this gradient filter down here, what I don't like is I feel like the shadow area down here is a little bit too dark. So there's a couple of ways I can fix this. I mean, the most intuitive way would seem like just to create another brush and then maybe brush in, you know, a little bit of brightness in here like that. And that works pretty well too. But another way to do this, let me delete this, is if I click on the gradient filter here, and then I right click while this is on, I right click and I select the eraser tool. I can just erase the effect that the gradient filter is having just under wherever I move my mouse. So let me hit the E key to get rid of the control panel there. And I'm going to adjust my brush size down and the feathering down just a bit. And I'll leave the opacity at 19%. That's fine. Maybe a little bigger brush. And what I can do is I can just draw in a little bit of negative space in here and get rid of some of the mask, and I'm only doing it at 19%. And let's see how that looks. That's a little better, and then I can just do it a little more. So that's kind of a neat way to reduce the effect of a mask just in a certain area. So it's like a local adjustment on a local adjustment. And this eraser tool works for the gradient tool and the two brushes, but not the control points. The control points, you have to use that negative control point. All right, now we're almost done. So what I'm going to do now is I want to darken this area over here. And I could do that with a brush, but I might accidentally brush into this green area here. So I can use a control point, but I'm going to use a control line this time instead, because it's basically the same thing, but it creates a straight line. So I'm just going to drag. It's very similar to the graduated filter. I'm just going to drag this up like so, and then darken this area down in here. Now I'm going to click the M key on my keyboard and look at the mask to make sure I'm not affecting this green area. And it looks like I'm good, but I'll increase the chroma a little bit just to get good separation between the green and her black fur. Hit the M key again, and that's looking pretty good. Now you may have noticed down in this area is dark again, and I can't use an eraser tool, unfortunately, because this is a control point. But instead, let me go ahead and select control line, make sure that this is active, then hit the Alt key on my keyboard and create a negative control line on this side. And let me just drag that in so it blends in nicely. And now you can see that this area is brightened up again. All right, then just some final touches, and these will be global. What I'll do is I'll just add a little clear view and a tiny bit of micro contrast. And then let's do a deprime XD, denoise, add some lens sharpness, and export this and see how it looks. All right, now the last tool I want to show you is the auto mask brush, where it basically you can cut out a subject from the scene or separate it from the scene. So let me pick a little bit larger brush for this subject, and then I'm just going to brush around this violinist here. And you want to just get a little bit outside of the line, like of her dress and everywhere else. And you want to, try to use the appropriate size brush if you can. Not too big, not too small. So for example, when I want to get onto the violin and do her arms, I'm going to use a little bit smaller brush. So let me just downsize that a tiny bit. Hit the E key to get rid of that equalizer. And let's just do the violin and her fingers, a little bit out there, and then her arm. All right, now to check how good a job it did separating, what I like to do is I'm going to hit the E key and just pull the exposure way down in this case. And you can see that it missed parts of her shirt here and a little bit on her hair. So what I can do is I'm going to zoom in, effectively making the brush even smaller, and just brush in directly in these areas, like so. And then let's see how that did. Yep, pretty good. A little bit in here again. All right, and then this part on the violin, maybe right in here. And her finger here is a little bit out, so I'll select that. And then, let's see, her hair, there was a little bit in here. All right, and then there's this bow. These are tough when the bow is right in there because the colors are a little rough. Okay, so it's a little bit rough, right? Let me try and do a little more. Now I have a couple options here. Not to mask the bow, or I can use the eraser tool to clean it up just a little bit. So let me reduce the feathering a little more, and then just brush the eraser tool. Let me click the opacity back up to 100%. And just click right in there. All right, that's looking better. So again, it's not perfect, right? But you can get pretty close. Oh, and it looks like over in here got a little bit too much bled out into there and under her arm. So what I'm going to do, see this part under the arm is really going to be tough, right? If I zoom in, I can probably get in there. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to erase this whole area again. And then go back to my auto mask. And let's go a little bit larger and just redo this area. A little bit cleaner this time. I'll move this down using the navigation. And now it's doing a better job. I went a little bit too far outside the line, it looks like. All right, perfect. And I'll just bring the exposure back to normal. And actually what I want to do is I'm going to brighten the subject a little bit. And from here, I'm just going to do a normal edit like I normally would, but without any narrating. So we're going to have a little editing ASMR session.